My name's Brian Livingston, and this is about funding the growth of your business. Do any of you guys have a business here? Do any of you guys want to have a business here? What do you want to do? You haven't decided yet? Okay. I know Mr. Glossman's got a business here. I know him. He's, okay, let's see what we can do. Whoops, let's try this. Right, okay. Tell me, those of you that do have a business, what's the biggest problem at your desk right now? Sorry? You have to speak up. I'm old and I can't hear. Come up, sorry. Okay. So your biggest problem, anybody else got any problems? Anyone else got any problems? You're all happy? All happy? Okay, so let's have a look. Is this thing going to work for me? Okay, do any of you know what growth capital is? Any of you ever raised finance? David, I know you have. Anybody else? Does anybody ever want to raise finance? How much do you want to raise? Well, I can't do it here because this is impossible, but okay. How much do you want to raise? Give me a number. 10, 100, a million? Sorry? 150,000. And what will you do with it? Okay. Well, let's talk about what growth capital means. And I should tell you, many years ago, I was a venture capitalist. And many years ago, I used to make lots and lots of investments in fast-growing companies. And they always used to come to me, and they always used to ask me for growth capital. And what growth capital means to me, and one of the things I really want to make clear, when you talk to finance people, they won't speak the same language as you. And today I'm going to teach you how to speak finance. Because if you talk to him in the same language as he talks to you, you're probably liable to get on okay. If you don't, he won't swap. He's got the money and you don't. So what growth capital means is to invest in systems. And by the way, my colleague at the back has a vague sense of humor. Systems, that's a football pitch, and that's supposed to be a system like 4-4-2, 4-4-1-1. It's for acquisitions, two hands shaking. Again, that's supposed to be a joke, but he is an accountant, so forgive him. Then it's to increase production capacity, beer bottles, humor. And then it's funding your business in general, and as well to recruit talent. And that is one of the biggest problems with most businesses. If you don't recruit the talent, you can't get the sales. And if you haven't got the sales, you can't raise the money. I'm not going to solve that today. I'm good, but not that good. Okay. So what we're going to look at is what type of funding might be most appropriate for you. We're going to look at where it might come from, and we're going to look at the benefits and the drawbacks of all this funding. Now, you've all read my company's warning. Anything I say, you are to completely ignore, not rely upon, and if it works very well, it was my idea, and if it doesn't work very well, I work for Pricewaterhouse. Okay? So, what we think is we meet lots of attractive, growing businesses. They'd like to meet funders to share a happy and successful future. But the funder wants value for money, reliability, suitability, and he doesn't like his time being wasted. Okay. So, let's look at it. Suitability. How many of you think you're risk takers? Oh, that's good. You're not. But anybody who wears a tie on the whole is not a risk taker. So how many of you risk takers? Let's have a look. What's the biggest risk you've taken then? Sorry? I don't count personal life. What's the biggest business risk you've taken? You'll have to shout. Buying a house? That's not a risk. Oh, I get it. You bought one but didn't sell the last one? Okay, that is a risk. That's suicide, not a risk. A risk is something that you understand, okay? What about gearing? Do you know what gearing means in our world? Gearing means borrowing. How many of you are borrowed? Do any of you borrow on your credit cards? That's a no-no, by the way. That's a no-no, but gearing means how much you're willing to borrow. Personal guarantees, have any of you come across those? Personal guarantee is when you go to the bank and the bank says, in order to make sure I'll get my money back, would you leave your wife, your children, your cousins, and everything you have ever earned and will earn in the future, so if it goes wrong, I'll take it from you. Does that encourage you to borrow? Not a lot, no. When you get loss of control and independence, if you get somebody to lend money to you like a bank or like a private equity house, what do you think they want to know? Do you think they just give you the money and say, you look like a good girl, I'll give you the money, off you trot, come back next year? What happens? They want to know. Now, do you regard that as informing them, or do you regard that as them being aggressive, nasty, and intrusive? Yeah, most entrepreneurs think that banks and private equity people are intrusive and aggressive. What do you think banks think they're doing? They think they're being cautious. They think they're looking after your money, because banks are very frightened of losing money. It's very easy to lend. It's harder to get it back again. I know this. I have children, and I continually lend them money, and I've never yet got it back. So, have any of you worked with any outside funders like investors or high net worth individuals? Any of you worked with them? And how's that gone? How's that gone? Sorry? So it's been tough, has it? Why is that? You'll have to speak up, as I say. Okay, so it's been very tough. Quite often you meet guys who want to invest or support you, but I always think it's a bit like a marriage. You've got to choose your husband very carefully, because divorce is very, very, very expensive, and it's emotionally draining. And every time an investor comes in, they come in with the best of intentions, but quite often later on you've fallen out. So my advice to you is, if people offer to lend you money, think very carefully. Think about talking to their friends or people they've already invested with, better still. So if they've ever lent money before, what have they been like? Are they okay? Check them out, because it's very easy just to take money and everybody's very nice at the beginning, but once you marry them, the rules change. And before anybody says anything, my wife is wonderful and none of the rules changed, okay? I've done this speech before, and somebody grasped me up when I said, because I think my niece was sitting over there, and she grasped me up last time, so I'm not. So just so you know, repeat after me, his wife is wonderful. Come on. Good, good. Now we can move on. Corporate governance. If you get an outside investor, the rules change. You know why? Because he will want things. He'll want things like accounts. He'll want to know what you're doing. He'll want to make sure that you're spending money in the right way. The rules change. This is a partner who has a say in how things are. Now, sometimes it can be really good. So if you get somebody like David over there, who's sitting there, David invests in businesses, and he knows a lot of people, he can really help you. And he can introduce you to people you've never met before. He can take you to banks who know him. So that's great, but sometimes it can be a really unpleasant experience. One of the other great things when people invest, valuation. I have never yet met an entrepreneur who doesn't think his business is worth an awful lot more than I think it's worth. And you lot all think it's fantastic and it'll only go like that. And that's great, that's because you're entrepreneurs. But unfortunately, investors, well, we're all pretty grumpy and we're all pretty miserable, and a lot of us are quite old, and actually we've seen too many failures. So for everyone that's a James Dyson, for everyone that is the incredible person who makes a fortune, there's 10,000 of you that loses a fortune. So we're very careful in valuation. Most of us actually take the view that, do any of you remember John Wayne? John Wayne used to say a man is judged by his friends. When you're making investments, you work out who their friends are, who they mix with, who they're dealing with. So if, for example, you've got on the board somebody who's really good, that then makes everybody think, hey, this might be a good company. So if you can get I was about to say the finance director of Tesco, but realized that was a bad example. But if you can get a finance director of a fast-growing company or somebody who's made money before, that will really help you raise money. Okay, but equally, for your business, if you're looking for an investor or looking to borrow, somebody brings money along, what are you looking for? Well, sometimes you're looking for somebody that has a track record in your industry. So, for example, some of the banks at the moment are very good at helping you get international orders. And if you go with a bank like that, they can really help you. Sometimes if you're growing very quickly, having a small investor is the wrong type. But equally, if you're not growing that quickly, having a big investor isn't a very good idea. Sometimes if you're investing, again, you want somebody looking at cash flows. Sometimes you want somebody who looks at assets. A lot of the time, the investors are different horses for different courses. Okay, let's look at debt. That, by the way, I think is that the Bank of England? That's the Bank of England, sorry. Oh, that means money. Debt. What is senior? Have you heard the term senior debt? Anybody heard that? Do you know what it means? It's really, we like using terms to confuse you because it makes it more sophisticated, and that way you'll sort of sign longer agreements. So, senior debt, he's the first in line to be repaid. That's what it means. He tends to have a lower risk and he tends to have lower interest rates. But senior debt require much more detailed cash flows, and they quite often, for the larger amounts, require an external person to look at it. The margin today, does anyone know what LIBOR is? You all familiar with LIBOR and base? LIBOR stands for London Interbank Offer Rate. And most of them charge about 3 to 5% over LIBOR, and they charge you very nice fees, about 3%. Then you have junior bank. If senior is up, junior is lower down. And junior bank debt typically comes in for more mature businesses. You're just not going to get either senior or junior for a startup. Why do you think that is? For a startup, why will you never get it? Because you can't repay. You've got no sales. You've got no cash. The bank manager looks at it and says, tell me why I should lend you this money. And you go, because I might have some sales someday. Doesn't really work. In fact, will you lend me money? I haven't got any sales. Will you give me some money? You want to see a track record. You want to see evidence. You want to see history. You want to see that my perfect lend, if I was a banker, is somebody who's been really successful. In fact, most of the time, if I'm a banker, truthfully, do you know who I like lending to? The people who don't want to be lent to. In fact, if you ask me to lend to you, that shows you need the money, in which case I probably don't want to give it to you. It can be quite complicated being a bank manager, but a lot of the time, loads of my clients who have got cash on the balance sheet have bank managers knocking on the door, begging to lend them money. Quite bizarre. Term, if you can get for a more mature business, you can get 3 to 5 years. It's covenant lender. Are you familiar with what a covenant is? A covenant is about interest cover. It's about debt cover. So interest cover means, for example, it might be 2 times debt. No, I'm losing you. I'm moving on. Okay. Let's move on. This is very big today, asset-based lenders. Have you come across them? Asset-based lenders lend against your debtors, and they're now one of the biggest source of financing in the UK. They are asset-based lenders advancing against equipment, against invoices, and they're very popular today. Why do you think they find it easy to lend? Because if the debtor exists, they get their money back. They will typically lend up to 85% of a debt. And they're very, very popular. They're very cheap to use. And for some businesses, they are fantastic. But think about it. If you've got a Christmas business, and at Christmas you make all your sales, what do you have to do in the month leading up to Christmas? You have to buy stock. What don't you have? Debtors, because you haven't sold it. So sometimes for seasonal businesses, they can be terrible. But asset-based lenders are very popular. Property finance, that's very good and that's very popular at the moment. That's lending against commercial property and you get a longer lend. Other debt instruments I'm not going to go into because I'm conscious of time. Have you heard of mezzanine debt, anybody? Okay, mezzanine debt. Let me tell you about that. It is in between debt and equity. Sometimes people call it the marzipan layer. And that's basically it's basically high interest, typically 16 to 18% cost, but they don't take a big stake in your business. I'm not going to go into it too much. Okay. Private equity or venture capital. Who thinks they'd like private equity or venture capital? Anybody like it? Anybody heard good stories about them? Anybody heard bad stories about them? Okay. Anybody heard any stories about them here? So what is private equity? Private equity, as much as anything, is defined by what it's not, which is public equity. Private equity lends to private businesses. And private equity, it does things, they like three-letter acronyms. They like MBOs. Anybody know what that is? Management buyout, management buy-in. They'll lend money to grow. Now, the company I worked for was a very famous old company called 3i. And they used to be called venture capitalists. And we used to say, we've never been in venture capital, at least not knowingly. We don't like lending money, we like getting more back than we've lent. So a lot of the time with private equity, they're very, very careful in what they do. Venture capital tends to be a lot smaller, and some of the ones, particularly America, does a lot more early stage. The UK is kind of not brilliant at that. But venture capital is early stage startup expansion capital. I have to say the UK, it is really hard to get. If you were in America, life would be a lot easier. So maybe you should start up in America. Okay. So what does private equity look for? They look very simply to make money. If you shine a torch on a private equity investor's eyes, you will see dollars. You'll see money signs. It's the only thing he's interested in. You will not see a trickle of emotion. Whereas if you go to a high net worth individual, you'll find he maybe likes the business, he maybe likes you. Private equity, no. It's cash to cash is what he cares about. For them, control. When I was studying law, they told me that 51% was really good. Private equity don't care. What they do is they make so many control rights that even if they got 20%, they can stop you doing things. They have what's called negative rights. They can stop you selling a bit of the business, hiring staff in. But on the other hand, it's for your own good. You might not like it, but it can be helpful. Management generally draw up a plan, and you agree with the private equity that plan, and if you deliver against that plan, by and large, you won't hear that much from them. If you don't deliver against that plan, they do bad things to you. And the bad things are, they take control of the company. But first of all, they'll move heaven and earth to try and find a solution to your problem. My strong recommendation, if you've got problems either with bank or private equity, talk to them. People don't like surprises. Surprises are for one thing and one thing alone, birthday parties. Don't bring surprise into finance. We don't do surprises. We're very, well, at least I am, boring. Okay. So, basically what are the metrics for private equity, just to give you a quick idea. For a mature business, it's double your money in 3, treble your money in 5. For a startup business, I might look for 10 times my money back in 3 or 5 years' time. Why do you think the difference in return? Very simple. For a startup business, it's much, much higher risks. Most startup businesses fail. And do you know what? Most entrepreneurs will fail, but it doesn't matter. We have now reached a world that failing is a badge of honor. Not trying at all is no badge. Trying and failing is a badge of honor. And if you go back to see equity providers today and tell them you've failed, it doesn't matter as much, because hopefully you've learned Led Zeppelin 4? Wasn't me. But they like you to have lost, they don't like you to have lost money, but you shouldn't, what I want to tell you, you shouldn't be ashamed. James Dyson lost money. Richard Branson lost money. They've all been bust. So there's nothing to be ashamed of, and as more and more entrepreneurs move forward, you should say, not try and hide it, you should talk about what you learned from it. Because so many businesses fail, so don't worry about it.